Welcome to Rodriguez-Boette, and thank you for taking part in the Jacksonville Historical Society's Oral History Project, The Melting Pot, the Diverse Cultures of Northeast Florida. And you have an interesting story to tell. You've lived in North Florida many years, I
Yes,
believe.
since 1987, yes.
And I want you to tell us your story. I want you to start by telling us your country of origin
Okay.
and what your life was like in your home country.
Well, I was born and raised in San Juan, Puerto Rico, so I'm Puerto Rican. My parents are Puerto Rican. Puerto Ricans are a very diverse population. A lot of people come from Europe, from all places in Europe. My mother's grandfather was Irish, so her maiden name is McAllister. My father's family came from the Canary Islands. So it's a melting pot in Puerto Rico, so I'm used to that. I was born in 1959 in San Juan, and I was raised there. I went to parish school. The reason to go to a parochial school was because there were American nuns that taught the classes, and my mother knew that at some point we probably were going to move to the United States. So she wanted to be sure that we learned English. So our nuns were from Philadelphia. So I went through parish school, and then I went to the University of Puerto Rico and graduated from the University of Puerto Rico. The senior year in the University of Puerto Rico, I was in the Faculty of Education, and there was an exchange program between the University of Puerto Rico and UMass Boston. And the reason there was this exchange program was because there were a lot of Hispanics moving into Boston, and the Boston public schools were desperate for Spanish-speaking teachers. So they will have us spend a semester in Boston, see how it worked, and then they will offer us jobs. So I participated in the exchange program, and while I was there, I met who became my future husband. So when I was offered a job in Boston, I came back to Boston to live, which is really what probably was going to happen. But I know that you want me to talk about my life in Puerto Rico. Puerto Ricans a couple of years ago were deemed the happiest people in the whole world. Probably because we have extended families. So I was very close to my cousins.
Did they all live near each other?
Yes, we all
families?
lived near each other, so we visited a lot. We spent every Christmas, and every birthday of everyone was celebrated. So at least every other week there will be a big party. And people take time to visit one another, and they take time to go out. In Puerto Rico, even though the financial situation of the island is so dire, still people are out and about all the time. And it's a completely different way of life than in the United States. Something that I miss a lot is during Christmas. When you are in Christmas time, at lunchtime, everyone goes out and they sing. There's a lot of singing going on outside. People sing. There's people singing in the streets, people singing as groups. There was always a lot of singing. That was something that I miss terribly. When I visited Spain, I spent a whole summer in Spain studying, and the Spanish are like that also. There's a lot of singing in the streets, and that made it wonderful. So that's one of the things I miss terribly is Christmas time, the singing, the happy. It's just we have a completely different way of life. And it has to do a lot with the weather. And of course, when I moved to Florida is a lot more relaxed. And living in St. Augustine is a very Spanish town. And the people that were running the tourism industry in St. Augustine has always wanted to have that singing and that happy, but it's not the same. It's just completely different. In Puerto Rico, people also, even though they go out a lot to eat, there's a lot of food always. Life revolves around food. So you go out, where are you going to eat? Where are we going to stop? Where are we going to drink? Where are we going to see? Where are we going to eat? And you arrive to anyone's house and you're fed immediately. Doesn't matter if you were invited or if you just happened to be in the neighborhood and decided to knock on the door. And in the United States, you never ever do that. You don't show up at someone's house just to visit. You make an appointment. So it's just different, but life revolves around food. My mother and my grandmother are wonderful cooks, and my aunt was a wonderful cook. So there was always a lot of food, a lot of baking. And food was very different. We did not buy anything in the grocery store that was pre-cooked. Everything was made from scratch. So that was just wonderful.
What's typical cuisine of Puerto Rico?
The cuisines, there's a lot of rice and beans. There's a lot of fried food, a lot of seafood. There's a lot of chicken also eaten, but a lot of fruits that now, in the last, I guess, 10 years, you can find here. But I remember when I moved first to Boston in 1986, in 1983, I was pregnant with my first son. And during the winter, I wanted banana ice cream. Oh my gosh, I just wanted banana ice cream. To the point that I told my husband one day, don't come home unless you have a pint of banana ice cream with you. And he could not find any ice cream, no bananas, because they were not in season. So there were no bananas and no ice cream. So in Puerto Rico, there was always ice cream. There was always tropical fruit. So things were more available because you were used to eating what was available. Right now, we are in a very global economy in which you eat everything all year round, but it wasn't like that. And it was all right because it was a treat. Like, you will eat guavas when they were in season, and we have guava trees in my house. So there was guava jelly and guava jam and guava cakes and cookies. My grandmother could do anything with any fruit. And that was wonderful.
Talk about your brothers and or sisters.
Well, I don't have any brothers. I have an older sister, and then my parents were divorced, and my father remarried, and I have two much younger sisters. But my older sister and I are very close. We were raised together, and we went to school together, and we went through the university together. And even though she lives in Houston, we have remained very, very close. My younger sisters, I stopped seeing them when I moved to the United States because I would not visit as much as I wish I could. I just could not afford it. But in the last 15 years, my father got very ill and came to live in the United States with my older sister. And then my younger sisters were already adults and they were working, and we have become very close through that illness. I'm happy to say that my father, even though he has been dying for 15 years, is very much alive and well. So we make fun that he'll never die. But anyway, it was a happy childhood because there were a lot of children. There was only two of us, but there were 7 cousins, and we were all raised together. And we were sort of all raised by my grandmother, even though everyone lived in their own house. But my grandmother was the person that kept the glue together. She was the one that had all the parties and all the food and all the invitations. It was very nice. It was I have missed having that kind of family relations here, because although my husband's family is lovely people, they were not like that. So if you needed a babysitter, you always knew there was someone in Puerto. If you were being in Puerto Rico, you just started calling, your aunt, your cousin, your niece, your nephew. There will be someone. Well, here it's not like that. It's just a completely different way. So I have raised my children very much to be Americans, but very much to be Puerto Ricans. Our family relations is very much like a Puerto Rican family.
So when you first came to the United States, to Boston for your, it was like an internship or residency?
It was an internship, it was an exchange program, where we were going to do our internship, our educational internships in the schools in Boston.
Was that shocking to you?
It was horrible.
Tell me about it.
It was, first of all, they did it in winter. Boston is one of the coldest cities in the United States, probably the coldest. They did it in winter. They placed us not they placed us in different families, with different families, and it was just rough. It was just rough. The people that came in the exchange program were probably middle class or upper middle class, but the assumption was that the assumption was from the people that were running the program, the University of Massachusetts, was that since we were Puerto Ricans, we probably would be doing well in living in lower middle class, and we were just not used to that. So it was very wrong. I mean, they put us in neighborhoods that I would not send anyone into that neighborhood. So we lasted 2 or 3 weeks in those houses, and then we got together as a group and said, we really need to get out of this housing and find an apartment somewhere that is more like what we're used to be, because it was shocking.
So you were afraid in these neighborhoods?
Terrified.
Oh.
Absolutely terrified. The neighborhoods were terrifying. The train was terrifying.
Oh.
We were told that there were a series of stations we should never get out of, because Boston was very rough in the 1980s. So rough that were some schools, if we were sent to certain school, we would have to be sent with an escort, with a police escort. So it was a very rough environment. Of course, they didn't tell you that. It just sounded wonderful. Oh, we're going to Boston, it's wonderful. So it was very rough. So we got together, and we were already all probably 20 years old. We just, we could figure out that this was not the right place. So we found an apartment and rented an apartment and said to the people that were running the internship, we'll stay, but this is where you sent us, is not acceptable. So it was a rough. It was also winter, it was very cold, and then we were exposed to prejudices that we have never been exposed before, because in Puerto Rico, you can be any color and you can mix. In Puerto Rico, there will be prejudice socially for wealth or lack of, but not for color. In Boston, the minute that you open your mouth and they knew that you were Hispanic, you were treated as a second-class citizen, and we were not used to that. It was very, very difficult.
So economically, most of you who took the internship in Boston, you had your economics and your home life in San Juan were better than what you felt.
Exactly. Exactly. We were taught, because the assumption was that we would be comfortable where other Hispanics were living. And unfortunately, the group of people that were immigrating to the United States at that point were people that had very little money.
So you were put with families of Hispanics?
No, we were not. We were not put with families of Hispanics,
Okay.
which made it very difficult also.
Okay.
Because it was just, there was not that amount of caring. So it was just difficult. But we survived, and they put us in bilingual programs, and the schools, the Boston public schools are rough. No way around it. I mean, they're city schools, inner city schools. We were sent to inner city schools, to the point that when my father came to visit me, he arrived at the school and called me on the phone and said, I'm not getting out of the car. This is not safe, and I would like you to get down here, get in this car, and go home with me. That's how unsafe it was. And of course, being 20 years and knowing everything, I said, I'm staying.
Now, by this time, you were in your apartment with your friends.
Yeah, I was in an apartment with my friends, and then I met Bob, which was my husband.
Did you meet him
husband.
right away?
Within a month of being in Boston.
And you met Bob.
And I met Bob, and then I started looking,
And he was a northerner by birth, was he not?
Bob's family has been in the Boston area since before the American Revolution. We have them documented in that area since before the American
So did he
Revolution.
change your mind at all about Boston?
Yes, he did. I mean, it was, and his family again was very lovely. They lived in Foxborough, and he lived in Foxborough, but he had been born in Boston. And they were very, very lovely, and his grandparents were wonderful people. They lived in Boston. So yes, he sort of changed my mind. And then when the time got closer for me to leave Boston because I needed to graduate, I needed to just graduate from the university, I was offered a job with the Boston Public Schools.
Did you stay?
Yes, I came home for the summer and then I went back and stayed and gave it a shot. But Boston, it was still very rough. It's a rough place. It was a rough place. Of course, we go to Boston quite a bit because his family is still there, and it has changed a lot. But it was very rough. There was terrible prejudice in Boston, as there still is. So when after our second son was born, we decided that we needed to leave Boston. I didn't like the weather. It was cold all the time. And it was just very rough to be there, being Hispanic.
What was cold weather in San Juan?
Cold weather in San Juan was 70 degrees.
Okay.
When the temperature dropped to 69, everyone had a sweatshirt on. So, cold weather in Boston. We were in Boston this winter. It was the coldest winter they've had in 100 years. It was 9 degrees and windy. It was unbearable. It was like, yes, just like I remember. But anyway, so Bob had a friend that was going to school at Flagler College in St. Augustine, and he came to see him. And when he came back home to Boston, he said, I found a place where you're going to be happy. And we moved to St. Augustine, and I loved St. Augustine from day one. And I never ever have had the problems that I had in Boston. People in St. Augustine were actually excited.
Were you married by this time, by the time you moved to St. Augustine?
Yes. We got married in Puerto Rico.
I was going to ask about that.
We got married in Puerto Rico, yes.
Puerto Rican wedding?
No, actually it was a very small Puerto Rican wedding. Unfortunately, we gave my mother 4 days. We were visiting, and then I said, I think we should get married. I don't want to get married in Boston. If we're going to get married, we need to get married in Puerto Rico. And Bob said, okay. So we got married in Puerto Rico at my mother's house. It was a nice ceremony. The justice of the peace that got us married did it in English because he wanted to be sure that Bob knew what he was getting into. And one of the big things that he told Bob was, when you married into a Puerto Rican family, you married into the whole family, not just to the person. Bob loves the culture. He really does. Loves the culture. He cooks the food. He enjoys the music. Tries to learn the language. So yeah, it's been pretty good. But yes, St. Augustine it's been very, very good.
And what year did you move to St. Augustine?
In 1987, February of 1987. So it'll be 31 years.
And let's talk about your life in North Florida, because you've spent a lot of your working life in the Jacksonville area.
Yes, I have spent much longer than I ever expected. I was in St. Augustine. I'm a historian and an archivist, so I worked with the St. Augustine Historical Society for many years. And then after, I'm very project oriented, so I felt that I had completed many projects. I was with them for 17 years. But I decided that I needed to look at other things. I wanted to do other things, so I went and spent a couple of years working with my church. We're Lutherans, so I wanted to work with my church, and I did that. And then a friend of mine... Is your entire family Lutheran,
no, even back in San Juan?
No. They're all Catholic. Yes, Catholic. They're all Catholic. But so when you grow Catholic, you start moving away from the church because the church can be very conservative, and I'm very liberal-minded. So by the time I met Bob, I was not practicing. But by the time our first son was born, we decided that we wanted to raise the children in some kind of church, and Bob is Lutheran. The Lutheran church is very much, we call the Lutheran church like Catholic, very light, because it's much more liberal than the Catholic church, but it has the same liturgy and very many of the same rites. So I became Lutheran.
Was the church critical in any way with your adjustment to the United States?
I think the church in St. Augustine was very critical because having the opportunity of raising the children within the church, it was a very small congregation, and it was very good because my children, it was an older congregation, so my children did not have their grandparents available all the time, but they had 75 other grandparents that they saw on Sundays. We became very, very friendly with the pastor and his wife and his children. His children were the same age as my children. And there were a series of families that were all the same age, and all the children were the same age. So we raised these children all together. So all these kids all grew up together, and it was very good. And yes, it made it very easy. But of course, I was the only Hispanic. I was the only person there.
In the church?
In the church,
wow.
Yes. So anytime the church, and I'm talking about the whole synod, the whole state, had something, some kind of celebration or rite or liturgy, and they needed someone to read in Spanish, they will call me. Can you come and read? So I became very involved with the church, and I became a diaconal minister within the church. So I was very interested in the church work. I felt they were doing very good work. So that was important for me. My mother was all right with me becoming a Lutheran. My grandmother was not. She was very upset that I have left the Catholic Church.
And did that continue on?
Oh yes,
she
died.
Yeah, till she died.
Yes,
so
yes.
She was not.
She was not happy, but she understood that we needed to adjust. It was just an adjustment. I probably would have never become a Protestant if I was in Puerto Rico.
Let's talk about your American citizenship, because you were in a unique situation.
Yes, the experience of the immigrants that come from Puerto Rico is completely different because Puerto Rico was taken over by the United States during the Spanish-American War in 1898. In 1917, with the advent of the First World War, the Puerto Ricans were granted American citizenship by the Jones Act of 1917, so they could be drafted and sent to the war in Europe. So Puerto Ricans can come in and out of anywhere in the United States, while other Hispanics cannot. So our experience is completely different because we're American citizens. But when we arrived here, very few people know that, so we are treated like any other Hispanic. And that makes it very hard, because you are told that you are the same as everyone else, and then you come here and you're not treated that way. So it's lack of education on the American system, because you have people that are part of the United States, like the people from Hawaii, they have their own culture and their own language. The people from Alaska is the same. And I don't think, and they probably do have the same amount of prejudice that the Puerto Ricans do. I know they do. Because they're not what you consider an Anglo, a white Anglo. And to tell you the truth, I would hate to live in the United States and be a black person, because I think their lives are so hard just because of the color of their skin. And living in St. Augustine and being a Spanish town, St. Augustine, was founded in 1565 and remained Spanish until 1821. I live in a bubble because I'm Spanish, and everyone assumes that either my family has been in the town for 300 years, or I'm just visiting and it's wonderful because I'm a Hispanic. So we live in a bubble in St. Augustine. I do know that in other places it's not like in Boston, it's just completely different. So the experience is very different. It's very hard, like for example, there's some states in the United States I would not visit because I would never put up with someone asking me for my visa or my passport just because I'm Hispanic. That's ridiculous. I'm an
You think
American
that's,
citizen.
you think that's as
And
per
that-
state?
Yes, exactly. Some of the states, I know Arizona and Colorado do it. And I would not never put up with that.
Just like if you go to make a purchase or?
You're just,
what
yeah,
they
if you're
ask?
walking down the street
Oh.
and you look Hispanic and they will ask you, where are your papers? American citizen. And having to explain, and then people that will ask you that are ignorant enough not to know that Puerto Ricans are American citizens, and they probably will not believe you. So I'm very, I'm very aware of it, but also I'm very proud of being Puerto Rican and living in America and living the American dream.
Speaking of being proud of being Puerto Rican, this is just a current event I want to cover with you because you clearly have family in Puerto Rico, and Irma, the hurricane, the terrible weather system that came through the Caribbean and Florida and other places, certainly affected San Juan and Puerto Rico. Tell me what you know about that and how it's affected your family and your family's life up here in Florida.
Well, it's affected us terribly because being American citizens, always knew that you could go in and out. You could go to Puerto Rico anytime. You could go and visit family, you could buy property. But suddenly after the hurricane, so many of the things we took for granted that we could go back to were not there anymore. So it has been very, very hard for the people living here. And of course for the people living in Puerto Rico has been terrible. My sister and one of my best friends did not have electricity for 6 months. And I just still cannot understand how they could manage, but they did. My sister was taking care of my father because his nursing home was shut down for a couple of months. And she got up in the morning and she went to work and she came home and she did a lot of volunteer work going out into the island because she lives in the metropolitan area, going out into the island, helping other people that were worse off, and then going home to no electricity and water once in a while. So you just cannot understand how they survived, and then you can understand how you just don't have any concept of how poor people could be in some of those neighborhoods because you were not exposed to it.
Did schools, the public schools or the private schools go on? What happened?
The public schools were closed for months. The private schools opened earlier. The public schools, the problem was that if half of the town had electricity and the other half did not, they would not allow the public schools to open because they could not open all in the same town at the same time, which was ridiculous. I mean, adjust for goodness sake. Only all the problems that we have seen became very evident: the corruption in the government, the lack of leadership, the utilities, the electricity, the electric grid was falling apart, the water supply was terrible. So suddenly all of that becomes very real and very tangible. And then Puerto Ricans expected to be treated like the rest of the states in the United States. And for them to be able to get the help they needed, it was a terrible fight. The government just did not produce.
You're about the U.S. government?
Yeah, the U.S.
did not
government,
give
the
them-
federal government, they just didn't seem to be able to get organized or to accept the fact that they're American citizens, period. Well, everyone else was screaming they're American citizens, but it happened the same with St. Croix and St. Thomas. The U.S. Virgin Islands are in the same, they're the same, they're American citizens. And they hardly got services, even though they're all American citizens. And the expectation was that we were going to be able to help them. So it has the problems that the island have and all the islands have became very evident to everyone. One of the good things was that I think a lot of people realized that these are American citizens. Oh my goodness, when did they become American citizens? I mean, it still proves that the public school system in the United States is terrible. I mean, if you don't teach about the history of your people to your own people, it's just a terrible thing, because people are never educated enough to understand who they are and where they came from. So it just become very evident, all the problems that we have in Puerto Rico and the problems that we have here.
Now, coming back to North Florida and to this time, contemporary times, tell me about your current immediate family.
Well,
so you mentioned your one son and
well, I have 3 children, and I have 2 children that live here in Florida, and actually one of them lives in St. Augustine with us, and the other one lives in Jacksonville. My daughter lives in Jacksonville. She loves Jacksonville. She's a teacher there. My son that lives in St. Augustine with us works for insurance company, so he commutes also. And then my other son is in Austin, and he is in the computer world, so he's very much computer world. But they don't speak a lot of Spanish, they understand a lot, but our family relations are very much like if they were raised in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is very matriarchal, which means that when mom speaks, everyone listens and does what mom is supposed to do. So our food that I serve in my house is very Puerto Rican. We keep some of the holidays like in Puerto Rico. For example, Christmas, we celebrate the 25th of December as Christmas, but we also celebrate Epiphany on January 6th. That's the visit of the 3 kings to the child. So we have a lot of the customs that we would have, but mainly a lot of the food and a lot of the family relations. We have a lot of family, and we're close to our family. And we want to keep it that way.
And probably most people listening don't know that we've had the opportunity to work together.
Yes.
So this is a really special, special interview for us to work, to talk with you and speak with you. So we're very familiar and have our own personalities as a twosome. So I'm trying to keep that out of this interview. But I'm learning a lot about you and your family that I didn't know as well, although some of this I did know. So your family here, and you've talked about, they're very Americanized. Do you envision at any time any of you moving permanently back to Puerto Rico?
I think my sister would love to move to Puerto Rico at some point. And my cousin who's been in Boynton Beach, he was with Motorola and now he's with another company. He's gone back and bought an apartment in Old San Juan. And we're all very jealous that he just did it. He just decided because he wants to be able to go back and forth. And after the hurricane, we've talked about maybe buying property in Puerto Rico.
So that's interesting. Why is that?
I think it was because first, before the hurricane, it was just so accessible. It was there. You could go, you can do it anytime. But suddenly, after the hurricane, it became something a lot more precious. You know, what if we bought, you know, an apartment or something? What if we retire? What if we have something that we could all go back to Puerto Rico? So we have talked about it. And I think a lot of people feel that way. Puerto Ricans always feel that they can always go back because, you know, we're American citizens so we can go back and forth, but because there's always something to go back to. While other countries might not, that, you know, other people from other countries might not feel that they've something to go back to, we always felt that there was something to go back to.
And you have touched on your career here,
Yeah.
but I would like you to talk about that just a little more.
Well,
what you do.
How I arrived into Jacksonville was because I had a friend who was a museum director in Jacksonville, and she called me and she asked me if I would come and help her maybe for a year, organize her archives. Well, 9 years later, I was still there. So, and then I went to the Jacksonville Historical Society, and you asked the same, can you come for a little while and organize the archives? So I was there for 3 years. So slowly Jacksonville became so familiar. I'm so familiar, and I like to go places and learn how to navigate through the places, how to go from one place to the other, what people do, how they do it, the type of people that lives here. So, and I have made wonderful friends in the Jacksonville area. Northeast Florida is very different to the rest of Florida and very interesting. And people are very warm, can be very warm and helpful. So it's been great. I mean, Northeast Florida is my home, and I like it.
And I know you have a big fan club in St. Augustine.
Yes, I do.
You have you have worked for years at the Face Show House in wonderful capacity, if you'll talk about that.
Well, I am an archivist, and after I left the Jacksonville Historical Society, I started my own company. So I am a consultant for archives and museums. And the Face Show House had not had an inventory of the furnishings since 2001. So we just finished inventorying March 30th was the last day. And now we are going to deal with all those items that you have to deaccession, all our loans, and then organize our archives, all the research that has been done to document the house. And that's something I absolutely love, to do that kind of things, because then you get to know the properties, who was there before. And then you prepare it for the next generation to take over, which is, I think, in the last few years, have become something that I'm very interested in, leaving the history world and the archive world ready for the next generation to take over.
What about your husband's work, Bob?
Bob works for Northrop Grumman. He has been with Northrop Grumman for 30 years. Northrop Grumman in St. Augustine has a big facility, and he literally builds airplanes. So it's a job that he likes very, very much. It's very rewarding, especially when one of those airplanes that was built from scratch flies. It's very exciting. So he likes it there also.
We have a few more minutes left in this interview, so please, if there's, number one, anything you want to add, if there's anything else you want to say, if you want to address what you've embraced the most about your life in the continental United States, and what you've missed most about Puerto Rico.
Well, like I said, I miss a lot of the family reunions. Right now, every time we need to do a family reunion, it's a big ordeal because everyone is so far away. I have cousins and family everywhere, scattered throughout the whole world, literally. So to get together is difficult. My uncle still lives in Puerto Rico, and he has a farm, and once a year, he has a big party in June, and everyone is invited. You just show up. And sometimes everyone shows up and sometimes doesn't. So those are the kinds of things that I miss. And I miss that my children did not have a lot of that type of family, because I think they enjoy it tremendously. But we knew when we were growing up that we had to leave, because in Puerto Rico, education was very inexpensive, so everyone was encouraged to go through the university system, because there was not enough jobs. So they were preparing us to send us abroad because there were not enough jobs in Puerto Rico. Unfortunately, it's still like that. So many people have left the island, especially after the hurricane, because there were not enough jobs. And it became impossible to survive. So we were actually raised, and my mother was very wise on seeing that happening, because with her generation it did not happen. There were still a lot of jobs, a lot of opportunities. By the time we came around, our generation, she saw that we were probably going to have to leave, and she wanted to prepare us. And a lot of parents did that. The parish schools in Puerto Rico were very successful because so many of the parents knew that we were going to have to go abroad. So it has been a generation. There's of the people that graduated with me, probably 75% are in the United States right now. And of my cousins, I have 3 cousins left in Puerto Rico. The other ones are all here. So it's sad because we were raised in a way that maybe that might come back because people are living so much longer. So we see now so many people, generations living together. But that was how people lived in Puerto Rico, generations lived together. So your grandmother probably lived with your aunt and their children, or with your mother. So we might go back to that because it was a way of living, of helping each other. But it was lost for a while, but I foresee that it will happen again because people are living so much longer. And because people I think we miss having our blood around, people from that are like us, that remember us when we were children and how that we lived with us. So, Northeast Florida is a great place. I think St. Augustine for us is home. I've always been home. So, and when my children say that they're coming home, they're coming to St. Augustine. They're not going. And when I say I'm going home, I'm going home to St. Augustine. And it was a hard switch. But one day you just say, "Oh, I'm going home," and they ask you, "Home where?" And you say St. Augustine, and that's when you realize that you have adapted and you make your life.
Well, Taryn Rodriguez-Boette, I want to thank you, and I'm going to let you say your name before we end because I have never pronounced it as beautifully as you do.
It's Taryn Rodriguez-Boette.
Oh, and I thank you so much for being with us today to add another layer and another dimension to our Melting Pot project. Thank you.
Thank you.